If your kid's whine feels like it's designed to trigger you, that's because it actually is. Researchers Sokol, Chang and Thompson demonstrated this with a simple experiment. They gave a group of adults some maths equations to solve, and then they played different sounds in the background while they worked. These include a recording of a child crying, a child whining, a person speaking in a parentess voice, and even the screech of a table saw. And what they found is that everyone, even the people who weren't parents, made the most mistakes when they heard a child whining. It was more distracting than the crying baby or the sound of that power tool. So when your child's whine instantly pulls your focus and tests your patience, you're not being a bad parent. Your brain is just doing what it's built to do. But the problem is that biological reaction is exactly how the whining trap starts. Your child whines, your brain reacts, and you respond immediately. Maybe you give them the snack that they're begging for just for some peace, or maybe you snap and tell them to stop whining. It doesn't actually matter which way you go, whether you're being helpful or you're frustrated, the whining worked. It stopped you in your tracks and pulled your attention entirely onto them. Now, your kid isn't trying to be an evil mastermind here. Really, they're just tiny scientists, constantly trying out new behaviors to see what works, what gets your attention, and what gets their needs met. And somewhere around the age of 2, whining shows up as one of those experiments. And because we're biologically programmed to jump the second we hear a whine, that experiment is a massive success, so they keep using it. That's really all that's happening here. It's not manipulation and it's not them being naughty. They've just found a tool that works. Now, just because you're evolutionarily wired to react doesn't mean you have to just put up with the whining. You have the power to break this cycle, but to do that, you have to change how you react to show them that whining has officially lost its power. And the most effective way to do this is by pairing 2 techniques, the extinction method and positive reinforcement. Now, I know the word extinction can feel a little harsh when we're talking about our kids, but in the real world, it just means that you're starving a behavior of the reward that's keeping it alive. And for a child who is whining, that reward is your attention. This is the part that's going to feel incredibly challenging because, as you know, your biology is screaming at you to react. That's why your very first step in this process isn't actually about your kid, it's about you. It's what I call a tactical breath. Taking a deep breath at this point gives you the second you need to move out of your stress brain and back into your thinking brain. And remind yourself that your child isn't being naughty. They're just a tiny person learning how to communicate, and it's your job to teach them a better way. Now, after taking that breath, you want to make a conscious choice not to respond to the whining. That means no eye contact, no shushing, and no negotiating. You're showing them through your actions that whining no longer works. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky because I've just told you not to respond to the whining, but you can't just leave them there. They still have a need that needs to be met, and this is where we bring in positive reinforcement to teach them a better way. Now, I do want to be clear here because this next part of the strategy are for those times where you're actually able to fulfill your child's request straight away. But there are going to be moments where the answer needs to be a no. In a moment, I'll walk you through how to handle those hard no situations. But for right now, let's look at the times where you're actually able to help straight away. So for example, you're in the kitchen trying to get dinner started, the stove is on, and your child is at your feet whining that they want the toy because their favorite truck is sitting on the kitchen bench. Now, usually you just grab it and hand it over to them to make the noise stop. But this time you take that tactical breath, then you look at them and acknowledge their feeling and then direct them on how to communicate without whining. So you might say, I see you're upset and I want to help. Can you ask me using your calm voice? Now, sometimes you'll get lucky and your child will calmly say, Mummy, can I have the toy? When that happens, move fast. Grab the toy and give it to them straight away. And as you hand it over to them, you want to tell them exactly what they did. So instead of just saying, good job, here's the toy, you would try something like, I love how you used your calm voice. Of course you can have the toy. Here it is. When you name the thing they did well, you're telling them exactly what you want to see more of. And because they got the toy straight after, they start to connect the dots. That when they use a calm voice, they get what they want. And when they whine, they don't. And over time, this encourages them to start using their calm voice instead of the whining, because they worked out that that's what actually gets results. Now, just while we're on the topic of praising your child, I mentioned that good job isn't something I generally recommend. It's actually one of 8 phrases I hear parents using all the time, thinking it's helpful when really it doesn't always send the message we think it does. I put them all together in a free guide called 8 Parenting Phrases to Rethink, and it walks you through what those 8 phrases are, why they don't quite land, and what to say instead. And the link to that's in the description if you want a copy. Okay, back to the calm voice. Now, in the ideal world, your child will switch to their calm voice the moment you ask them to. But life is anything but ideal, and it's much more likely that they'll keep whining even after you've asked them for that calm voice. If they do, you have to hold that boundary. Don't respond to the whine. Instead, encourage them again to use their calm voice. So you might say something like, "It's really hard for me to understand you when you're talking like that. Can you tell me again in your calm voice?" And then you wait. Give them a moment to try again. And the second they ask for it calmly, you follow through and hand them the item while praising them. Now, if they are still struggling after that step, this is where you can step in and model exactly what calm sounds like. So you might say, "Mummy, can you please get me the toy?" Or if your child isn't yet speaking in sentences, you might just say, "Toy." The second they repeat it back to you, even if it's not word for word, if their tone is calm, that is a win and you want to reward it immediately. So you grab that toy, give it to them, and then use specific praise to tell them what they did well. You want to show them that using a different sound that isn't whining gets results. Now, before you try this at home, I want to give you a quick heads up. The first 2 to 5 days are going to be the hardest. Not getting a response from you when they whine is going to be a complete shock for your child. For months, maybe even years, whining has been their most reliable strategy. And suddenly, it just doesn't work. And here's the thing. When a behavior that previously worked suddenly stops getting results, we don't just give up on the behavior, we try harder. In the clinical world, we call this an extinction burst, and this will be that moment where your child's whining gets louder, longer, and maybe a little more dramatic. If this happens, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It actually means that the method is working. They're just testing the new boundary and seeing if the old rules still apply. If you can stay calm and hold the line through that burst, and by that I mean you ignore the whining and you coach them on how to use their calm voice instead, that whining should start to fade fast. Now, for most families, the worst of it passes within those first few days and they see real shifts within a week or 2 of staying consistent. Now, the key word here is consistent. Every main carer in your child's life, whether that's your partner, the grandparents, or the nanny, needs to be following the same approach. If you're staying firm, but your partner gives in the moment the whining starts, the whining won't fade. In fact, it'll probably get worse. There is a specific psychological reason for this called intermittent reinforcement. Think of it like a poker machine. If a machine paid out $1 every single time you pull the lever, it would get boring pretty fast. But because it only pays out sometimes and you never know when that's going to be, it's incredibly addictive. When you cave occasionally, you're turning yourself into a poker machine. Your child learns that the whining pays off just often enough to be worth the effort. So they'll whine longer, louder, and more persistently just to find out if today is the day that they hit the jackpot. So before you start this, get everyone on the same page. Now, everything we've covered so far assumes that you can actually give them what they're asking for, like the toy on the bench or a drink of water. But there are going to be times where the answer is just no. Maybe they want a dinosaur at the supermarket or another episode of their favorite show before bed. In these situations, coaching them to ask nicely doesn't work because the answer is still no. Instead, you want to acknowledge their feeling, not the whining, and then briefly tell them why it isn't possible. So you might say, "I know you want to watch TV, but it's time to play outside." Now, because they are learning that asking calmly is the best way to communicate, they might actually use their calm voice and ask again. If this happens, acknowledge their effort. Thank you so much for asking calmly, but we still need to go outside. Then, to help them with that transition, you can offer them two choices that they're happy with. Do you want to play with the sandpit toys, or do you want to jump on the trampoline? If they're calm enough, they will choose one and move on. But sometimes they don't stay calm and the whining turns into a full-blown tantrum. In that moment, you might try talking them through it or offering them more choices. But every explanation you're giving them is just adding more noise to a brain that is already overloaded. And in fact, it can be prolonging the tantrum. The trick to managing these tantrums effectively and quickly is to do something that might feel a bit counterintuitive, but it works perfectly for the state of their brain in that moment. In this video right here, I step you through exactly how to respond, meet them where they are, and keep those tantrums as short as possible. So make sure you click here to watch that one next.